Hello new TAs. My name's Ryan, and in this video I'm going to tell you what you need to know to be a WSU Chemistry TA. Let's begin by going over how the chem courses you will TA for are structured. These include the 100 level courses, such as Chem 101 and 105, and the organic course 345. The 100 level courses have three main components: a lecture that usually meets 3 days a week, a tutorial that meets once a week, and a lab that also meets once per week. The tutorial sessions are a time for the students to go over lecture material, and lab is when they'll perform their experiments. These are scheduled so that lab takes place right after tutorial. Chemistry 345 is similar, but instead of tutorial, the students meet for a 20-minute pre-lab briefing before they go to lab. Instead of lecture material, this pre-lab briefing focuses on the day's experiment. Now, any given chem course can have anywhere from a few hundred to as many as 800 or 900 people in it, so to make things more manageable, each one is divided up into lab sections of up to 24 people. As a TA, you'll be in charge of one or two of these sections. There are a number of exercises and assignments that your students must complete to get the points they need to pass the course they're in. These generally include weekly quizzes and homework assignments, and some courses have in-class exercises too. All courses always have midterm exams, a final exam, and laboratory reports. The last of these consist of 3 parts. First is the pre-lab. This is typically an experiment summary they'll write in their lab notebooks. In the 100 level courses, they will either have to submit an image of it before the day of lab, or it will be due when they arrive for tutorial. The second part is the data. As your students perform their experiments, they'll have to record the various things they observe and measure in a lab notebook. This section is due before they leave lab for the day. And the third is the post-lab assignment, which is due sometime in the week after they performed their experiment. These are completed electronically and submitted online. The post-labs generally consist of questions and topics the students have to address about the experiment they just performed. For example, they might be asked to calculate the concentration of an acid solution they were analyzing. A big part of your TA job will be to grade your students' lab reports, and we'll have more to say about doing this later on. Some instructors may also have you help with exam and quiz grading. Now let's go over what you'll be doing as a TA. The bulk of your job will consist of 6 things. First, if you're a 100 level TA, you'll be helping your students out during their tutorial sessions. This will mostly involve answering questions they have on the lecture material. Some instructors will give you worksheets or other exercises for your students to do during this time, so you'll be helping them complete these worksheets. If you're a 345 TA, you'll deliver the pre-lab briefing that explains what they'll be doing in lab that day. To help you out, we'll give you a presentation you can use to do this with. The second part of your job is getting your students through lab. As your students perform their experiments, you will have to answer any questions they have about their procedure, enforce the safety rules, and make sure the room is clean when you're done. We'll have more to say about these later. Third, grade your students' lab reports, and do it promptly. Your students rely on the feedback you give them to improve, so it's important you get their reports graded and back to them on time. 4. Holding office hours, where you will meet with the students on a more individualized basis to help them with homework or lab reports, or whatever else they need help with. If you happen to get a student from another course who needs assistance, you should at least try to help them even if you're a little shaky on the material. Office hours is something of a misnomer. You'll actually meet with them in Troy 305 rather than your own office. 5. Proctoring exams. Most courses have 3 midterms and 1 final. Check the syllabus for the course you are assigned to for the time and dates these will take place. And keep in mind you need to show up half an hour early so you can get the exams, make your way to your exam room with them, and set up for it. And lastly, attending weekly meetings. These are usually at 5 p.m. every Monday, though it can be at some other time depending on your course. This is when we talk about what you're going to be doing in tutorial that week, what you need to know for lab, and miscellaneous course-related news. This is also a good time for you to ask any questions you might have about the procedure, tutorial, or anything else that's going on. Of course, before you can attend your section or sections, you have to be assigned to them. We'll do this for you before the semester starts and send you a copy of the lab schedule sheet for your class so you know what you've been assigned to. This sheet will tell you when and where your tutorial/pre-lab briefing and lab will take place. If you're assigned to a 100 level course, make sure you know where your tutorial room is ahead of time. They're scattered all over campus, and some of them are hard to find. Now that you have some idea how the courses are structured and what your primary duties are, let me show you what a typical TA's work week might look like. As we go along, I'll point out and explain all the various things you need to know about and do to be successful at your job. First, at least several days to a week before lab time, go over the procedure your students will perform so you know all about it yourself. You can access these procedures on the course webpage. Each lab also has a TA note sheet we'll email you that have experiment summaries and will tell you about things to watch out for and pay extra attention to. For example, if the students tend to have trouble with a specific piece of glassware, there'll be a note in the notes about it. If you have any questions about that week's lab, you can always ask the course instructor and/or the lab supervisor about it. Next, check your mailbox in Fulmer 313. Some of the things you'll get there include worksheets that your students will go over in tutorial. Make sure to give yourself some time to do these yourself. Believe me, this will make it much easier to answer your students' questions. You should also be given an answer key to check your own answers against to make sure you got them right. Another thing you'll find here are paper copies of the lab's grading keys and the notes I mentioned a minute ago. And in the first 2 weeks of the semester, you'll get attendance sheets that you have to complete and return to us. Next up is the pre-lab briefing, or tutorial depending on what class you're assigned to. This is when you'll either deliver the day's pre-lab presentation or help your students get through their worksheets respectively. If you're assigned to a 100 level course, keep in mind you gotta make full use of the tutorial time, so no bringing your class to lab early. After the tutorial/pre-lab, it will be time for lab. But before we get into what exactly you'll be doing there, let's talk about what keeps the lab rooms running and supplied with reagents and equipment. This entity is the stockroom, of which there are two, one on the 4th floor and one on the 3rd. These are where reagents are stored and made, and they're run by a manager who is in charge of making sure everything is put out in your lab room for the day's lab, so you don't have to put them out yourself. You may have to replenish reagents as they run out, but we'll talk about that later. Now, the lab rooms are locked up when not in use, and we don't issue you a key to them, so you'll have to stop by the stockroom to borrow the key you'll need to get into your room. Make sure to bring the key back when you're done with lab so the next TA can use it. This key is usually the only thing you'll have to get from the stockroom. Like I said, all the reagents and other equipment your students will need will already be in your room. Before your students can start lab, you will have to perform the first safety-related check you're required to do, which in this case is a dress code check. Your students' legs and feet must be completely covered up, and they have to have a lab coat and goggles. If they forgot to bring their goggles, they can either buy a new pair from the Gen Chem office, Fulmer 319A, or they can borrow these from a drawer in the room. However, loaner goggles are provided on a first-come, first-served basis. If they can't buy or borrow goggles, they'll either have to go home to get theirs or drop that week's lab. Unfortunately, if they forgot to bring pants or appropriate shoes, their options are more limited. They could either run home to get theirs or have someone bring them a pair. The dress code is important, but it's just one component of the safety rules you and your students must follow. Note the use of the word "you" there. The rules apply to you, the TA, as well. Fortunately, although your students have to buy their own lab coat and goggles, we provide these for you at no charge. For a complete list of all the lab safety rules, see the lab safety contract. You can find a copy of this in the TA handbook. One particular rule I want to say something about concerns goggles. So you know, safety glasses are not an acceptable substitute for goggles. If you wear glasses, we have goggles that will fit over them. Let us know if you need these. After you've checked to make sure everyone's dressed appropriately, give them whatever last-minute instructions you need to. Make sure the room's fume hoods are on. Most rooms have a switch for these somewhere. And then you can turn your students loose to start experimenting. And this brings us to the reagents and equipment your students will need to do their labs and where to find them. With some exceptions, all the reagents your students will use will be in the room's main fume hood. One thing that won't be is DI water. That comes out of a special faucet, usually one with a plastic tap or a white button on its handle. Most of their glassware is in the drawers at their individual stations. Since many different sections use the same room over the course of a week, many different students will use the same drawer and the glassware in it. If you are performing an experiment that requires probes, like a temperature probe or a pH probe, you can find these hanging up in a bundle somewhere. Probes are controlled by these here computers, which when not in use live in a charging rack somewhere in your lab room. So what do you do if you run out of a reagent, or if one of your students breaks a piece of glassware, or you have a computer malfunction? Well, if you need to replenish a reagent, have one of your students take that reagent's container to the stockroom, and they'll provide them with more of it. Why send a student instead of doing this yourself? Because the lab rooms need to be supervised at all times, and so you can't leave them to run errands. If one of your students breaks a piece of glassware, first make sure that all the pieces of glass are cleaned up. Broken bits of glass, or for that matter any piece of glass you need to dispose of, such as a Pasteur pipette, have to be placed into these glass waste containers and not in the trash. As for replacing the broken glassware, the student can go to the stockroom to get a new piece. Breakage is accounted for in their student fees, so we won't charge them for it. One other thing to mention about replenishing reagents, glassware, or other lab supplies. We've got these tickets in the lab room for you to fill out to send with a student. So if you need, I don't know, an Erlenmeyer flask or paper towels or what have you, check the right boxes on the ticket, put your signature right there, and give it to the student to take to the stockroom with them. If one of your students spills acid or base, we have neutralizing agents under the hood you can use to neutralize the solution before you clean it up. If the spill is somewhat large, as in more than a few milliliters of liquid, we have these pads and socks you can use to absorb it. These live in a clear plastic bag in your lab room. When dealing with larger spills, keep in mind one of the university's basic spill cleanup guidelines. If you can clean it in 5 to 10 minutes or less, it's small enough you can deal with it yourself. However, if it's bigger than that, we'll need to call EH&S in to deal with it. Granted, that's just one of a handful of spill cleanup guidelines. For more information on cleaning up spills, see the university's training course. If you are experiencing a computer malfunction, try turning the computer off and back on again, and then connect the probe. If your computer still doesn't work, ask the lab supervisor or stockroom for assistance. For that matter, if anything with your lab doesn't seem to be working right, or you have a question, you can ask the lab supervisor about it anytime. We're here to assist you. As your students perform their lab, there are 4 main safety and upkeep related things you'll have to check on. These are goggle enforcement. Make sure every student in the room keeps their goggles on until they leave the room or everyone in it is done experimenting. If someone keeps taking theirs off, give them a couple of warnings to keep their goggles on, but if they continue to leave them off, you can kick them out of the lab room. Eating, drinking, and chewing gum, none of which are allowed in the room. In fact, no one's even allowed to have a water bottle out. If you see one, have your student put it in their bag. The waste container. Periodically check it to make sure 1, its lid is on at all times, and 2, the contents don't go past its fill line. If it gets up to there, ask a student to take it to the stockroom so it can be emptied. And finally, deal with accidents as they come up. If you have a student cut themselves, there is a first aid kit in the room with supplies for tending the wound. If they splash chemical on the skin or burn themselves on something hot, make sure to flush it with plenty of cool water for about 10 minutes. If one of your students gets chemical in their eyes, each lab room has an eye wash they can use to flush it out again with. Most sources recommend flushing the eyes for 15 to 20 minutes if this happens. If a student becomes significantly injured or ill, call 911 and let the professionals handle it. In any of these cases, let the lab supervisor know about it. There's some paperwork that needs to be filled out. If you hear a fire alarm, turn off all gas taps, unplug hot plates, and evacuate the building with your students. Don't try to take your lab room key back to the stockroom in this event. This may cause you to go further into the building when you need to be getting out of it. The course webpage will have a map that will show you where exactly you and your students need to go after you leave the building. Though it's not quite safety related, there's one more thing you also have to pay attention to, especially as your lab's ending time approaches. This being the clock. You must get your students out at your lab's designated ending time and not a minute later. To help make sure this happens, have them start cleaning up at least 10 minutes before this time. If you have a student who has not collected all the data they need, they'll have to work with what they have and accept the point penalty. When a student is done experimenting and says they're ready to leave, check their equipment drawer to make sure all the pieces in it are clean and in their proper places. Let me clarify clean. By this I mean it's okay if a piece has hard water stains, but they absolutely must be free of any traces of reagent, solids, or solutions. Once you have verified that all the pieces are clean and accounted for, sign and collect their data pages. Whilst we are on the subject of drawer cleanliness, if one of your own students arrives for lab and they discover reagent in their glassware or broken glassware, make sure to report this. This way we can deal with the problem and ensure it doesn't happen again. Before you leave, you have to make sure the room is all cleaned up and ready to go for the next section. Make sure to check all of the following. The fume hood. Check that the reagents in it, including acetone bottles if you have them, are at least half full. These have to be replenished if they are not. If there is any waste in the waste container, even a little bit, make sure it gets emptied. And absolutely, definitely, check the caps on all containers to make sure they're screwed down. If there are any solid reagent spills, sweep them up and put them in the waste container. If a student spills acid or base, neutralize the spill and mop it up. Don't forget the airfoil, that needs to be cleaned too. And don't leave any glassware or stray pipettes or anything like that in the hood. And no blind sweeping under the airfoil. Sharp stuff can hide under there, and you don't want to cut yourself on it. The balance area. It's unfortunately not uncommon for salts and/or solid reagents to get spilled on or around the balances. If this happens, the spills have to be swept up, and both the balances and the area around them have to be totally clean when you leave. Check the floors. Any bits of glass you find on them goes in the glass waste, and paper or other trash goes in the trash. Speaking of trash, if one or more of the smaller containers are full, take it out. There's a somewhat larger trash can in the hallways you can put the bags in. You don't have to take care of the trash barrels, but you do have to deal with the smaller containers. If that seems like a lot of stuff to remember, it kind of is, but not to worry. Remember those lab notes I mentioned earlier? They contain a list of all the things you have to take care of before you leave. Use them to make sure you've got everything. You'll also be given a copy of this list in a checklist form when you come to get the key to your lab room. When you're done cleaning up, tick all the boxes to verify everything's been taken care of. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be the one to do all the tidying up and cleaning and replenishing. You've got a whole mess of students you can use to help you out. Different instructors will have different ways of assigning students to do these jobs, so check with them regards how exactly you'll do this in your course. But what happens if your room isn't clean and you leave? Well, and no one likes this part, But you'll get an email, and the email will say something like, "Hey you, the balance area wasn't clean when you left." And then you'll have to come back and clean it. And remember, you're not the only one who's going to use your lab room. More often than not, there's going to be another section coming in after yours, and if there's a mess in there when they do, they won't be happy. When you're done making sure the room is clean and ready, lock the door and return the key to the stockroom, along with your clean list checklist. One more thing I wanted to say about lab. As you lead your students through it, if it seems like any part of the procedure is confusing them, let me know. We're always trying to make the procedures better. Time to talk about grading. The 3 sections of your students' lab reports, the pre-lab data and post-lab, will all have to be graded, and you're the one who's going to grade them. Lab assignments in the 101, 105, and 106 courses are submitted and graded on the course webpage. There's different ways to access these reports, but maybe the easiest is to go into Assignments and scroll down until you find the lab exercise you want to grade. Open it, and you should see something called Speed Grader in the upper right corner. Click it, and the page that opens will look like this. There are a few things I want to show you on this page. One of them being this menu right here, which you can use to select a specific student and/or section if you teach 2 sections. Below that is the Originality Report Score, which checks to see if the student plagiarized their work from someone else. If this flag looks orange or red, open the report to see what the student's work matches to. Sometimes the program gets a little overeager and gives you a score that implies plagiarism when there really wasn't any. Other times, however, it will be obvious that what they wrote matches word for another student's work. If you run into something like that, let the course instructor know. Next up on this tour is the grading rubric, which you can open by clicking View Rubric. Now, we don't use Canvas rubrics in every course, but we do use them in 101, 105, and 106. Just gonna move this over so we can see the rubric a little better. Each item on the report that we assign points to has a row in the rubric with different options for how many points they've earned for it. For example, in this section we give you the option of assigning half a point for full credit or a quarter point for partial credit. And there are some descriptions here that should help you determine what a full credit answer is and what a partial credit answer is. When you grade each item of your student's report, you can click on whichever points option seems appropriate, and the program will put the points in right there. You can also add extra comments for these items in the boxes here. As you go along, it adds up the points you assign for you, so by the time you get to the bottom, their final score is already calculated. So all you have to do from there is click Submit Assessment, then move on to the next one. Aside from that, you'll also get an expanded rubric by email to complement the Canvas one. These go into somewhat more detail than we can provide on Canvas, and should answer any lingering questions you might have about grading. But if you still have any questions about grading, just ask the course instructor or lab supervisor about it. If you're in a course that doesn't use rubrics, you'll have to grade their data pages the old-fashioned way. For their post-lab assignments, you can use the grading tools up here to do your grading work. For example, there's a point annotation tool for leaving comments on the report. This is useful because if you ever have to take points off for something, you should tell the student why you did so. Grading is going to occupy a fair amount of your time, which makes it easy to get behind in if you don't stay on top of it. So definitely stay on top of it. Other than your students' lab reports, you may have to grade quizzes for some courses, and there's a good chance you will help grade the exams, of which there will be 4. You will discuss this more with the course instructor during one of the TA meetings. So that's the rundown of what being a chemistry TA is all about. As you watched this video, I hope you noticed a theme about asking questions. I'll close this by saying that if you ever have a question about anything, don't be afraid to ask the instructor or lab supervisor. We want you to do well at your job, and we're happy to give you the information to make that happen.